Will they kill the racing department? No more MotoGP, no more Dakar? Will they move all Austrian production back to India? What about Husqvarna or GasGas? Will these historic brands still have a place? Questions that naturally rose after we found out that Bajaj acquired a majority stake in KTM, essentially gaining control. We can speculate, go by the rumors, but I think we can do something better.
In order to understand where KTM might be headed, we need to ask another question. Who exactly is Bajaj?
At first glance, ideologically, the two companies couldn't be more different. Take an example, in 2001, Bajaj launched their Pulsar. What came as a response to Hero Honda, they described it as a premium motorcycle. Their first performance bike, developed in collaboration with Kawasaki. Bajaj was so confident that they didn't even let the Japanese stick their name alongside. That Pulsar was a performance offering for Bajaj in the Indian market.
But from a Western perspective, it looked like yet another small cc practical motorcycle, far from our definition of performance.
That's the great divide. KTM was born out of passion for engineering and racing. They've strived to build the fastest motorcycles in their respective disciplines. And that's exactly the opposite of Bajaj. In fact, the Indian company started in 1926, and it took them 20 years to even dabble in motorized vehicles. And even then, they didn't build anything. They acted as mere importers of two- and three-wheelers.
On paper, these two companies have nothing in common. They shouldn't have worked together. Yet, in 2007, they did. And it was going to change both forever.
The Indians acquired a 14.5% stake in KTM, allowing them to expand towards the west, while providing the Austrians a window inside their domestic market. This partnership went further than that, as Bajaj went on to build small displacement motorcycles for the Orange team. What they got in return was access to new technologies like liquid-cooled engines, things that they hadn't implemented by that point. As time went by, that 14.5% stake grew to 48%, and finally, in the last couple months, to a majority package. Essentially, they control KTM now. If you want to see how that happened, make sure to watch our video on it. What started as a local operation grew to become a national household name. Bajaj became synonymous with transportation in India, and the conglomerate began expanding in other similar markets, from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and all the way to the Middle East.
Nowadays, they're the fourth biggest two- and three-wheeler manufacturer on the planet. I want you to get a sense of scale here.
In 2018, they reported turnovers of over $4.6 billion. They exported more than 2 million units. These are staggering numbers, especially since, in the West, most people haven't heard of them. And I think that's a great misconception we have. We live in a bubble where motorcycles are a fun weekend experience. But in places like India, it's far from it. If you want to understand where they got all that cash from, you have to grasp the true scale of their domestic market. Think of it this way. The EU's population revolves around 450 million people, with 40 million motorcycles registered. The USA stands at 340 million, with somewhere around 8% of households owning a motorcycle.
Those are not numbers to scoff at. Well, as long as you're not from India.
Their population is estimated roughly around 1.4 billion people. And what's even more incredible, about half of those households own some type of two-wheeled motorized vehicle. Yes, margin on these bikes are smaller, but let me put it this way. India, as a market, has more people than the USA and the EU combined. In fact, it almost doubles it. And that's even before considering the percentages of people that actually own bikes. That's how a manufacturer based on the domestic market could come in and swoop up KTM. Growing big in a place like India makes you a giant in the rest of the world. But the story of Bajaj had humble beginnings. A story that becomes relevant in 1959, when the manufacturer pivoted to building their own motorcycles. They got a permit from the government and went to work, with their first product offering being, in fact, a rickshaw. And that one, it blew up. Over the first 6 years since its launch, they managed to sell 1 million of them. Meanwhile, their rear two-wheeled endeavor was commencing. Because back before the 70s, what Bajaj really lacked was R&D expertise. And that's how they got tangled with Piaggio.
In the 60s, the Indians saw an opportunity. Back then, you could find four-wheelers for sale, but those were wildly expensive. Rickshaws were more affordable, with a catch. Legislation didn't allow private individuals to own them. That left a huge gap in the market for a middle class that desired freedom of mobility.
It's a familiar story, one that we kinda covered already in our documentary of the Vespa. And they realized it too, Bajaj acquiring a license from Piaggio to manufacture the Italian scooter and sell it locally. For the same reasons the Vespa took off in a struggling Italy, it managed to quickly gather an audience back in Asia. After a decade, just as things were taking off, the Indian government dropped a bombshell. All collaborations with Western companies were banned, bomb that nearly ended the motorcycle manufacturer. Bajaj was forced to adapt. Adding insult to injury, their license was going to expire not long after. That's how, as history turned the page towards the 70s, Bajaj was left scrambling to build their own development centers. And here's another fundamental difference between them and KTM. Think about it. The Austrians started with low volumes, a company driven by engineering and development. Meanwhile, Bajaj started off with mass volumes and only got to the engineering part decades after their inception. And all that needed to change, because they had to, not because they wanted.
Out of the struggle came one of India's most important vehicles, the Chetak.
Still having its origins rooted in the Vespa, the scooter managed to really put Bajaj on the map. For 12 years straight, it was the highest-selling vehicle in India. At one point, delivery times stretched to a decade-long wait. It became a symbol of mobility. The Indian conglomerate was riding on a high.
You know that saying, there's two types of riders, ones that fell and ones that haven't fallen yet. Similarly, with motorcycle manufacturers, there are two clearly defined paths: lifestyle and necessity.
Bajaj's current CEO even said so, and from the beginning, they had a clear target category in mind. Meanwhile, even them, on their website, described KTM as pure, performance-oriented, adventurous, and extreme. But their CEO had a point.
Each year, 50 million necessity two-wheelers get sold around the world. For lifestyle, that's 50 times less. From a business perspective, you can see where the real money is at. The trick is, you kind of have to pick one. And once that's done, you can't really swap your choice.
Bajaj may have wanted to expand to the lifestyle section, but with their name, they couldn't. That's why they turned to partnerships with Western manufacturers. Look, for the 70s and 80s, while Indian manufacturers sold many vehicles locally, those machines weren't highly regarded in terms of quality. And as soon as they were allowed to partner with more technologically advanced foreign entities, they took the opportunity. That's how Bajaj came to work with Kawasaki in the early 80s, brought in tooling and expertise from all around the world. The 90s saw them collaborating with multiple Japanese conglomerates, and even in modern days, they announced a partnership with Triumph, a similar one to the early days of their KTM venture. The question is, where did that one go wrong?
For the low-cc KTMs, they sold very well in Asian countries, with decent margins too.
The problem came with their more expensive counterparts. That's why Bajaj CEO said he needed to restore KTM's operations back to their core, to simplify everything, cut costs and restructure the Austrians.
What does that mean in practical terms? I wouldn't be surprised to see more layoffs or movement of operations, and that's not great news.
On the other hand, I don't think Bajaj is delusional. They realize that KTM is a premium brand and has to stay so. They even said scaling such premium brand isn't really an option, so they would rather focus on increasing the quality rather than quantity. That's their own words. Now, will they keep Gas or Husqvarna? We don't know yet. In fact, they don't know yet either, as KTM CEO stated that's a decision reserved for the following year. No matter how you put it, one thing is clear: KTM needs change. Something obviously needs to change. And Bajaj is no stranger to that process. They went from a shoddy reputation in the 70s to developing research teams in the 80s, all the way to launching 18 models over the same number of months around the new millennium. They've battled competitors, made strides, especially in manufacturing. What once was an industry in dire need of technological progress, nowadays, Indian factories are on par, if not sometimes better than their counterparts. They can produce really high quality items.
And that brings us to an uncomfortable question. Will KTM remain Austrian?
As CF Moto stopped part of their partnership with the Austrians, the rumor mill began to spin. It's said that Bajaj could take over some manufacturing of KTM's twins, and I don't see why they couldn't. Adding straws to the fire, Bajaj's CEO openly admitted that European manufacturing is dead.
And as much as I don't like it, you have to recognize he has a point. On the other hand, KTM CEO initially denied any such relocation rumors,
stating multiple times that such plans were unfounded. The thing is, go watch 1000 PS's interview with Gottfried Neumeister, KTM CEO, and you'll see some curious statements.
Do you see more of the business and manufacturing moving from Europe over to India?
I would say that is a question independent of ownership.
Here, Gottfried seemed to backpedal on the relocation. From a clear no, his attitude was more of, he would have considered it with or without Bajaj.
He said that the Indian manufacturer really appreciates the employees in Mattighofen. But honestly, what else did you expect him to say?
This is purely my opinion. I think at least some of the production will have to get moved. Would that be street bikes, small bikes, off-road bikes, everything? We don't know. And it's unfortunate.
Not because I have something against Indian manufacturing, but because that would mean the loss of thousands of jobs in the Austrian factory.
I hope I'm wrong, but until then, I don't see a path ahead where KTM keeps building the same volumes in their backyard. There is one last thing about this, an integral part of KTM, their racing department. That's another big question. What happens to MotoGP, to Dakar, motocross? Unconfirmed reports state that Bajaj initially wanted to keep all of it.
They're not stupid. They most likely realize that racing is part of KTM's pedigree and heritage.
You can't sell a bike that's ready to race without going racing. Ultimately, nobody on the outside knows what's going to happen with these massive teams. And from reading all the back and forward in the press, I doubt KTM or Bajaj know either. Not yet, at least. Gottfried sees racing as being integral to the brand, and I agree.
But if Bajaj really comes in tomorrow and tells them to cancel everything, does KTM CEO really have a saying in that?
Bajaj may not care about MotoGP, or Dakar, or racing in general. But they do care about selling bikes. And in the lifestyle segment, the win on Sunday, sell on Monday mantra does work.
It sells bikes. And I'm pretty sure they care about